walked with your friends here, shopped here, ate 7-layer cake here, prayed here, saw a matinee here. You are a part of Jewish history. If this was your Friday night, and your Saturday morning, if you walked these halls, had your first kiss here, or had a meeting here, you are a part of Jewish history. If you wore a bad suit and thanked your parents, bowled your first 200 game, took a bow, learned to swim, if you celebrated or mourned, if you made a stand or just stood here, you're a part of Jewish history. History is community, and for over 60 years, Jewish Historical Society of Michigan has kept our community's history alive. The highs and the lows, even today, keeping us connected, laughing, learning, engaging. You are a part of Jewish history, and we all want to continue to make history. Show your support for Jewish Historical Society of Michigan. We keep the past present, and you are our future.
Good evening and welcome to the 61st annual meeting of Jewish Historical Society of Michigan and the second and hopefully the last Zoom meeting of the Jewish Historical Society of Michigan. I want to welcome all of our members and guests to this meeting. It's been an interesting year and you'll hear about that in a bit. And I think we need to get started with the business, and I call this meeting to order. And I seek a motion right now to suspend with all business with the exception of elections. Do I hear a motion?
I move to suspend the business meeting and proceed with the election.
Moved by Jeannie Weiner and seconded by Stan Moretsky. And we move to the election of officers. And at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Jeannie, who is our chairman of the nominating committee and installing officer, will take care of that business right now. Thank you, Jeannie.
Do we not have the poll up there to vote on my motion? Okay, so everybody needs to vote to suspend business and then submit. And the motion carries. Good evening, everybody. I'm delighted to announce the slate of Board of Directors for 2021, nominated to serve a 2-year term expiring June 2023, Dee Dee Oster, Ken Bernard, Barbara Cohn, Ruthie Goldstein, the Honorable Susan Moisiev, Risha Ring, Martin Schickman, and Trudy Weiss. Nominated to serve a 1-year term expiring June of 2022, Suzanne Curtis and Mike Caskey. As installing officer, I move to accept the nominations of these directors. I see a second by Marjorie Jablin. All members of the Jewish Historical Society may vote for directors. The ballot is here. Please vote and then submit. You can see the names that I just mentioned. You'll have to scroll down to vote twice. We're just waiting for the results. Well, that was pretty overwhelming. Thank you. I now thank David Otis, whose term is ending. David has been an important member of our board, and we thank him for all he has done, which is a great deal for Jewish Historical Society of Michigan. Thank you, David. And I'm welcome our newest directors who you've just elected, Ken Bernard, Trudy Weiss, and Susie Curtis. Trudy was installed in absentia. She just landed in Israel just yesterday, but we know that all three of our new members are going to be important contributors to Jewish Historical Society of Michigan, and we look forward to working with you. And now we turn to the election of the officers for 2021. Nominated for President, Risha Reng, Vice President, Barbara Cohn, Vice President, Jeannie Weiner, Vice President, Mike Caskey, Secretary, Marjorie Jablin, and Treasurer, Ken Bernard. As installing officer, I move to accept the nominations of the officers for 2021. I see a second by Barbara Cohn. Please note, only members of the board and past presidents can vote on the slate of officers. Waiting for the results. Congratulations to all of the officers. I look forward to working with everybody. I know we're going to have a great year ahead. The board of directors, whose terms expire next year, but we're not involved in tonight's election. These directors' terms expire June 2022, are Susie Curtis, Nancy Gadharf, Larry Gunsberg, Marjorie Jablin, Mike Caskey, Stacy Simmons, Michael Smith, and Jeannie Weiner. We really have a great team. And now we have completed the business portion of the annual meeting. I turn it over.
I am very excited about this upcoming year, and I thank you all for your faith in me. And thank you to the membership for electing me to continue as your president for another term. I'm honored to be able to serve JHSM in this very critical and exciting time in our 61-year history. As many of you recall, in March of 2020, the world dramatically changed, and so did JHSM. We were forced to cancel all of our programs one by one. Gone was our sold-out bus tour. Gone was our very first fall color tour of Jewish Northern Michigan, and gone was our 10th anniversary J-Cycle. And everything else that was in the works for the months ahead was also gone. Initially, we thought JHSM would totally shut down and stop all programming. We quickly developed and unfolded a creative response to COVID when we introduced the first of many outstanding Zoom programs. Thankfully, this technology helped us change the direction of JHSM. With the talent and extraordinary efforts of our executive director, Catherine Kangany, Kara Schuckman, and Judy Safran, along with outstanding volunteers, we pivoted and produced 35 excellent lectures on Zoom for participants throughout all of Michigan, as well as over 27 other states, Canada, and Israel. The founders would be amazed to see how we were able to continue programming. We honored Fega Weiss of the Holocaust Memorial Center with the Simons History Maker Award. We were able to learn from scholars like Jonathan Sarna, and Mark Dollinger on a computer screen. Our participants learned a great deal about some of the hidden gems in our community, like the Wool Garden and the Clemens Library, as well as Michigan's early explorers and the contributions of Michigan Jews in history, art, theater, music, academics, business, and philanthropy. These outstanding opportunities would never have happened had it not been for the available technology and the creativity of our staff, who quickly shifted our program in order to continue serving our members and guests. Our staff and volunteers worked during the pandemic to overhaul our Michigan Jewish History Journal. A special thanks to Tracy Weissman for managing our award-winning journal. We were honored by the Historical Society of Michigan for the most outstanding printed periodical. We also overhauled the year-end bulletin, which is now our annual report, showcasing our achievements and our growth in membership, added knowledge production and programming, as well as an opportunity to thank our many donors and supporters. During the pandemic, we realized that programming for JHSM can never be the same, and it will be a challenge to return to the previous format. JHSM must reinvent itself for the future in order to survive and thrive. So, on February 1st, 2021, our very proactive and forward-thinking leadership overwhelmingly approved the recommendation of the Exploratory Museum Task Force to move forward and raise the needed funds to engage the services of Gallagher Associates, who will perform a visitor experience plan and feasibility study, and then provide our board with the proposed path for the future. The results of their study will create a roadmap for our organization for many years to come. This dream of a museum was first discussed in the mid-'80s when Stanley Moretzky, who was president at the time, began researching the possibility of establishing a means of sharing our history within the walls of a museum. We are excited to move forward with the Museum of Michigan Jewish History as a means to do just that. And we hope even more that our museum visitors will come to the museum from all walks of life. Patrick Gallagher will join us later to share the firm's latest successes in the Museum of Tel Aviv and also the Museum of Southern Jewish Experience, which just opened in New Orleans. Many thanks to JHSM staff and volunteers who are committed to the mission as we determine our next steps and as we interpret and share the history of Jewish Michigan. Throughout the past, we understand our present and actively shape our future. And remember, our star is definitely rising. Thank you for joining us tonight as we celebrate our past, elect our leaders moving forward, and now get an opportunity to listen to the person who will lead the team of experts. First, Dr. Catherine Kangany, who will introduce Patrick Gallagher.
Thank you, Risha. It is my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Patrick Gallagher. Patrick Gallagher is the founder and president of Gallagher Associates, the foremost museum planning and design firm in the world. Over the past 30 years, he has led the creation of some of the world's most memorable museum experiences, from his longstanding relationship with the Smithsonian Institution to high-profile projects in Asia, India, and Europe. He has worked with every kind of collection under the sun, from microscopic stardust to hundreds of vintage military tanks and aircraft, in institutions ranging from cultural history and natural science to sports, music, and the arts. A graduate of Northern Illinois University, Patrick is a past president of the Society for Experiential Graphic Designs and has served on the board of numerous professional design organizations, received numerous awards, and has been part of creating several national and international professional services, journals, and publications. And tonight, he speaks to us about why Jewish museums matter. At the conclusion of his talk, we will open it up to Q&A. Please submit your questions through the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen, not the chat feature. We will be using the Q&A feature tonight. More on that in a few minutes, But for now, without further ado, please join me in welcoming Patrick Gallagher. Welcome.
Thanks, Kate. Good evening, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here with you, and even more thrilled about the potential of being your partner in thinking through the opportunities and the potential vision of a new museum. It's an incredibly exciting moment in time when an organization takes that next, what I would consider just life-changing leap to create a facility that will house not only your memories, but it'll also be a place for education and dynamic programming and really create a vision to the future as well. So we're thrilled with what the potential is. But tonight I want to share with you some recent projects, and as Kate had mentioned, really think about what we consider the relevance of Jewish museums today. We've been fortunate enough to work in a number of Jewish history museums, both here in the United States and in Europe, and most recently a very large project in Tel Aviv, which I'll share with you as well. Each one of these is a representation of the community that they come from. It's not a representation of the design firm, it's a representation of the mission and vision of the community. It's our job to really work with you to understand what that means. So with each project, they have their own very particular audiences, very particular opportunities for engagement, mission, vision, and goals. So that not only do we create an opportunity for community involvement in the visioning of the museum, whether that's a new museum or a revisioning process, but we create the opportunity for a platform for communication within the community. So a museum isn't just about collections and storytelling. The museum is about the community that it serves. And so from the perspective of what a museum can be, it goes far beyond just bringing visitors in to enjoy the exhibitions. It's everything to do with programming. It's everything to do with social education and outreach. And as you begin to think about your museum in the future, the possibilities are endless. And after a rather unique and challenging year that we've all gone through, we're going to encourage you as well to think about your virtual platform. All new museums should have as robust a virtual platform as they have a physical platform, so that visitors not only can connect with museums from around the world, but that from around the world they can connect to you. So that'll be an important part of our planning as well. So let me share my screen with you tonight and take you on a little journey with some of these newer institutions. For those of you who don't have your volume turned up, I would suggest you turn your volume up a little bit. We're going to see a few video clips as we go along the way, and there is some music and narration with a few of them. So it'd be helpful for you if you want to turn on your volume, and keeping your microphone on mute won't affect that at all. So just a quick introduction. Kate gave me a very generous introduction and a little broader view of the company in general. We have offices in Washington, D.C., New York, Portland, and Singapore. This map represents a number of locations where we currently have either projects in planning or under construction. Many museum projects can run in excess of 10 years in length, depending on their planning and construction process. Others are much shorter, but many of the European projects tend to take a longer term for development. And Asia, the same situation. Many of our projects have been under construction there for longer than they are in the United States. So it's a different mindset for how museums are created in different parts of the world. The firm itself is built on 4 different platforms of 4 different operating groups. We have an interpretive planning division, a digital and interactive media division, a research and content division that is where all of our historians and researchers and writers are teamed together to help our clients in doing content research, photo acquisition and film acquisition, as well as rights clearances. And then we have a business operations group that does financial feasibility work, business planning and operational planning for nonprofit institutions. And that group will also be helping us in thinking about your project. And they're an important part of getting our clients to carefully consider what we call the right sizing of an institution. And in thinking about a new museum, it can be exciting, but there really wants to be some very strongly managed business guidelines to knowing that you can raise the money, you'll be able to operate the museum, keep it sustaining, and be able to keep it refreshed. So that business planning aspect of any new institution is as important as the vision itself. We focus very carefully on both the integration of the digital and physical worlds, and in integrating interpretive design and architecture. Media has become such an important part of the work that we're in and the world that we engage in. So wrapping that into the physical architecture interpretation and then looking at the business and operational sustainability of it is an important part about thinking of that balance of physical and digital in a museum today. Many of you, I'm sure, have been to Philadelphia to the National Museum of American Jewish History. The museum has been open now for over 10 years. It was an ambitious project for Philadelphia and an ambitious project for the community there. I think many of you probably know some of the history of the institution. It is financially a challenged institution today. They didn't build as solid a business plan when they set out to create this museum. And it has put them in a situation where they have more building and more exhibition than they probably can support. So that we're now working with them to rethink what the next generation of the museum is going to look like. So when I say we think carefully about right sizing an institution, this is a museum that in its own reflection, while a great project, probably built more than they had the finances to manage or to operate. It's a wonderful institution. The collections and the exhibitions are dynamic and engaging. We spent an enormous amount of time within the community, all the different immigrant communities in Philadelphia, to work on developing story and content. It was tested from a content standpoint and experience standpoint extensively with the schools in the region, Philadelphia region, so that they would use this museum as a platform for teaching and education. Their online programming is now much more robust than it's ever been, and they have built a very deep database of oral histories that become an important and valuable part of their collection. So while operations have been somewhat of a challenge for them, they have been very successful within the market that does use the museum, and their public programming spaces, their auditoriums and so forth, are very used by the community and have proven to be an important community asset. So I mentioned before about a museum really being a community asset. They open up their public programming spaces, auditoriums and classrooms, to the widest cultural community to use free of charge, so that those different community members come in and they engage with them. And it's actually generated a lot of public programming through cooperative education and interpretation. That because the exhibitions are now almost 10 years old, they are looking at a refresh of the museum. and they're looking at expanding their special event space to help generate additional revenue for the institution. Katie mentioned the Museum of the Southern Jewish Experience, which was originally the name of the institution. It's now the Museum of Southern Jewish History. The Museum of Southern Jewish Experience was originally in Mississippi. They had a small collection, and it was started by a gentleman named Macy Hart. Some of you might know Macy. The museum ultimately closed, and a number of years ago, they engaged my firm to help them do a search for a new location for not just a museum, but a fairly important location for Jewish education in the South. And this will be the first of a series of smaller museums that they will open through the South, and one that is part of an engaged and enhanced education program for communities that have lost their, either synagogues have closed or the community has grown smaller, that it will be a way for them to keep education, Jewish education and outreach in the South. So they have both an ambitious plan for the new museum, but also a continued plan to do outreach and education. They also made a decision in planning this museum that they wouldn't buy wouldn't buy their own building. They are actually renting in New Orleans. We encourage them to rent for two reasons. One is they had not been an operating museum for so long, and we knew what the market share for visitation might be, and the early audience research that we did in the New Orleans region set for us what we considered estimated attendance, and that estimated attendance in New Orleans is about 65,000 visitors a year, and those are new visitors, those are not repeat visitors, because New Orleans is a tourism market. And then they have a changing exhibition space as well, and an education space, so that they will be doing ongoing programming within their community. So it serves both purposes, but from a financial planning perspective, it was much more cost effective for them to rent. And at the end of 10 years, when they believe it'll be time to refresh these exhibitions, it gives them a chance to stand back and decide, were they successful? Is it time to buy their own building, or will they continue to be in a rented space? So this is really their beta test for a new museum in New Orleans. We chose New Orleans, by the way, after looking at Memphis and a number of other locations because of the tourism market. We looked very specifically for Jewish cultural tourism. With Tulane in New Orleans, it really made sense. This museum is about a block and a half from the World War II Museum and a short walk from the central business district in New Orleans. So they've picked an excellent location. They have a great balance of collections, interactivity, and engaging exhibits that really were designed around not just the Jewish cultural tourism community, but the broader community of tourists coming to New Orleans that tend to move through the South on road trips. And this is a way for them to engage in thinking about the other communities they might want to visit. So on their website, they will be building different tour programs that you can, from New Orleans, take road trips, or from other communities in the South, make a road trip into New Orleans to see the museum and to explore the communities that had very robust Jewish life in them all the way throughout the South. This is the new Museum of the Jewish People in Tel Aviv. This was a passion project for us. It took us about 10 years to finish this project. It is the old Beit Futsot. It's on the site of Tel Aviv University. It is a complete building renovation and expansion for the museum. It was a unique process in thinking about the institution. What should they be, and what was the sense of engagement that would look at this broad, rich, oftentimes very challenging history, and how could we put a fresh perspective on this so that we can engage a younger audience and to think differently about what a history museum really means. With that perspective in mind, the team presented a series of options to the board, and the option of presentation that they have chosen is to start the museum in the contemporary world. Part of that was to really capture young people so that they can see themselves in the museum and allow them to then take that journey back and see what their connected heritage really looks like and why it should be so important for them. So by transitioning through the museum, they're going back through a historical narrative rather than starting with a deep historical narrative. We really wanted to start with this contemporary perspective of identity. What does it mean to be a Jew? The first phase of the project was to open this gallery. It's the Synagogue Gallery. For those of you who have been to Beit HaFetzot, they had a world-class collection of architectural models of synagogues. We took those models out, had them restored, added lighting to them, and then reinterpreted them and reinstalled them. So the Synagogue Gallery was open throughout their entire renovation, as well as a new changing exhibition gallery that was kept full with very rich and dynamic changing exhibitions. And that allowed us to continue seeing people at the museum and never having to fully close. They do have a very deep backbone of multimedia that they're using in the museum. It's the first time that they've ever engaged in this. Many theaters like this multi-surface theater and many hands-on interactives that really was part of the energy and impetus for them to think about the generations that they wanted to serve. I'm going to share this video with you. It's a really an overview of the museum once it was complete, on just looking back at not only the opportunities that we had, but also what a real heavy lift this historical museum did in creating this new museum.
Patrick, turn your volume up.
So now everyone has a real excuse to make that trip to Israel. These next few projects really look at what's happening in the changing market in Holocaust museums in the United States. There has been a real push by museums that are focused on the Holocaust to think about their relevance to their community in the next generation. And the Illinois Holocaust Museum a few years ago took a fairly large leap in not only taking what can be defined as lessons learned from the Holocaust and added to the museum an education center and an interactive theater. Their interactive theater was done with the Shoah Foundation. It's the Dimensions in Testimony program, where we took 7 of their survivors to California and filmed them in this unique camera system that you see on the left. And they are projected holographically in a theater. And there's a computer algorithm that was developed so that visitors can actually ask these survivors questions. I would say that the survivor community was the one that really were the push for this. They wanted to be sure that they could continue to educate when they were gone and that their stories would never be lost. It's a powerful experience if you ever have a chance to see the survivors in testimony theaters or interactives that are beginning to appear in a number of museums. They're a powerful teaching tool and have been a great asset for re-engaging a new audience at the Illinois Holocaust Center. In addition, we did an exhibition center called the Upstanders Center, and it really is a motivator for all visitors to think about their social responsibilities and what it means to be an upstander. We did an enormous amount of community research and engagement within their community to understand the applications for the Upstander Center and the kind of messaging that would involve. We opened the center with a fairly dynamic theater experience. We hired a hip hop artist to do the opening theater piece, which is a very powerful piece, a little bit disarming for some people, exciting for others. But it was a way to really say, we want to talk about this in a very different way in this museum. So I'll play you this quick clip of this film.
How strong do you have to be a survivor, to fight on, just so others can live on through your stories, the narrator that never dies? For you listening, may you always stand out and up. Continue to educate. Never think your reach is too short. You're never too young to teach. Create safe communities. Turn clay into pots of gold. Build and rebuild. Create and recreate. Fight for equality, even when the playing field isn't even. May your individual fights become collective victories. Use your voice. Use your art. Take history to heart. Take a stand for humanity. Never be silenced. Be a survivor. Be an upstander. Be the answer.
It's been a fairly powerful piece for the schools and has really brought a whole new audience into the Illinois Holocaust Center. Also in process for us is a complete renovation of the Kaplan-Feldman Holocaust Museum in St. Louis. They are doing a similar project at the end of their museum. They're creating a community engagement lab where the schools will be able to come in and engage in contemporary social issues through a variety of dynamic interactive programs that we're developing with them. We're in the middle of creating those programs right now. The museum is under construction, so I'll just quickly take you through some of the renderings of the overall Holocaust portion of the museum. The lab is still in design development, so don't have any current renderings of the lab. But it's saying to us that while the important messages of remembering the Holocaust are still incredibly relevant today, that there are messages that come out of these institutions that are as contemporary and as important to continue the voice for the fight for others. And so beyond just becoming a great museum experience, it's important for them to continue their outreach and education and be a place where there can be open dialogue about the social and cultural issues that we're all dealing with within our communities today. So be an exciting new addition for this museum as well. Many of you know the Malts Museum of Jewish Heritage in Cleveland. The Malts Museum is a community museum. It's about the reflective history of the Cleveland Jewish community. It was underwritten by the Malts family, but this museum also does a very robust changing exhibition program. So as we think about the potential of your museum, these are questions we're going to ask. Do you want to have a changing exhibition space? There are plenty of traveling exhibitions that are out there from all different kinds of institutions around the country, but it's an important question to ask about whether that's something that you want to have in your operations. How big should it be? Do you want to invest in traveling exhibitions? So when we think about what a new institution might look like, this discussion of changing or traveling exhibitions will be an important part of that conversation. The Malts Museum has done over a half a dozen very large scale traveling exhibitions, some of them still out on the road. I think Eichmann was in your region, the capture of Adolf Eichmann was in your region for some time. It's still traveling and actually heading to Europe to open actually in Germany. So these are many of these exhibits that are developed are on the road for 3 to 6 years. And that's their commitment to doing outreach, is they have a very robust traveling exhibition space. This last exhibit is the House of Fates, and the House of Fates, and I'll try to explain the name, is in Budapest. The government in Budapest made a decision to expand and build a new Holocaust museum. There is a current Holocaust museum there, and they went through a long campaign of trying to determine a more dynamic and more market-friendly identity for the museum. And so they came to this concept of calling it the House of Fates. It is, the new building is in a historic train station that was used to take Jewish men from the community into labor camps before the war. So their history of the Holocaust is, while much of it's similar to other parts of Europe, has a very intertwined political perspective of pre-war and its own community's perspective of anti-Semitism. So this is a big leap for the government in Budapest. The museum building is finished. We inherited a brand new piece of architecture that was designed for a different concept that they presented, and it was rejected. We brought 2 curators in from Israel and have completely replanned and redesigned the museum. What's unique about this museum is something that we're referring to as the continuity of life. This structure that you see that moves through all the exhibition spaces is really an infrastructure of the story about the continuity of Jewish life in Hungary, and that moment where it became so close to actually disappearing, but now the rebuilding of that in the museum is reflected on the last number of years as the museum, Jewish neighborhoods and culture are continuing to rebuild themselves and prosper. So while there, as everyone knows, many political challenges in Budapest, the community is growing, and they will have a new museum sometime by 2024. So it's an ambitious plan for the government. It's an interesting and unique balance between the Jewish community and the government there. But we're well into design with construction to begin sometime early next year. One more quick project. This is also a Holocaust Museum in Phoenix, Arizona. It's called the Center for Hope. They too are taking the perspective that they will have a very important interpretation of the war and the Holocaust, but they've also taken over 50% of their space to have a dynamic educational lab environment to deal with modern subject matter of anti-Semitism, intolerance, and human rights. Very dynamic and engaged space. We worked with the Phoenix School District to help build the program for this. And so their mission is to really be part of sixth grade education within the Phoenix area. So beyond just being an important historical asset, they're going to be a very important contemporary educational asset for the community. So they're in their capital campaign right now. I thought I would close tonight with just some recent research that we've done. I put together a presentation about a month ago for a museum conference in Europe, and they wanted to know what the typical business model for an American museum was. But before I show these slides, I do want to tell you that as kind of a recap to the whole concept of the relevance of Jewish museums today, I think Jewish museums today are probably in a lot of places more relevant than they've ever been. They're a reflection of their community. They're a reflection of the people that built the community. And they're also a reflection of the next generation of a community. And to think that even as in a historical narrative that people wouldn't be interested, it's a larger story of the American immigrant story and can embrace many different perspectives. And having come through a year and a half of seeing museums closed, as they open, visitors are flooding back to museums around the United States. They miss their culture, they miss their museums. We're helping a number of institutions reopen, and they're shocked by the kind of attendance that they're getting. So it's clear that people have carved out of their lives a place for cultural institutions, and that museums have become an important part of not only the what would be considered leisure time activities, but educational leisure time activities. And it's family, very important family time for the intergenerational family. And so I think now more than ever, coming out of a time that challenged us on a lot of levels, museums are really a place that have a chance to bring community back together again. So I think when you ask the question of relevance, now more than ever, I think these institutions are extremely relevant. So that what we looked at in the contemporary business modeling of a museum today is that for every dollar, 26% of that funding comes from government support, local and regional, 36% coming from charitable giving, 27% from earned income, and 11% from investment income of all different models. And it says to us that in the contemporary model for business modeling for a museum, the largest share of funds coming to American museums come from donors in the private sector. And this can be defined as individuals, charities, and foundations, but corporations as well, and individual businesses. So donors are not just individuals, they are a broader category of definition. Often these funds are specifically focused on education. So as you think about your new institution or the potential of your institution, education is going to be a critical part of what donors are interested in and what they hope the museum will stand for, not just interpretation, but really being a critical part of how you can educate the next generation of museum goers. So I'll run for you one last quick video on G&A, your partners for the future. Thank you, everyone, for your attention this evening and for your interest.
Thank you, Patrick. That was absolutely terrific. Before we jump to Q&A, I'm just going to share my screen for a moment. If you liked what you heard tonight, we'd welcome your support of this project. To contribute, visit our website, jhsmichigan.org. Click on the blue button up there in the right-hand corner. And don't forget to indicate that your gift is for our museum plan and feasibility study. And thanks for your support. We invite our donors who make a minimum $500 contribution to an exclusive Zoom evening with author Judy Battalion, author of The Light of Days, The Untold Story of Women Resistance Fighters in Hitler's Ghettos. And that's on Thursday, July 8th at 7 p.m. on Zoom. Visit our website to learn more. And now on to Q&A. If you'd like to submit a question, please do so through the Q&A feature at the bottom of the screen. And as the questions come through, I will moderate them. The floor is open. So Patrick, Thomas wonders, I'm interested in the possible synergism between a museum and a host university, as in research, courses, and more. And I believe that the Museum of the Jewish People in Tel Aviv is affiliated with the University of Tel Aviv. Are there other examples that you know of?
Many museums affiliate with universities and for accredited programs, and for universities that have museum studies programs, we see a lot of intern in the sense of bringing in interns who are in the museum studies program to do active work in the museum for credit. So there's also countless opportunities for programming as well, but it's pretty limitless depending on what the focus of the university's curriculum is and what you hope to gain out of it. So I think the opportunities are there, you just have to reach out.
Stephen wonders, what methods are used to assess people's preferences as major decisions about museum structuring and as goals arise?
There's a good question. As your partner, it's really our responsibility to bring to you multiple options for both an interpretive structure, as you're thinking about the interpretive structure for your institution, the programmatic structure, so that you can weigh out what the pros and cons are of each of those. So you really want to we believe that you want to have the opportunity to think about it from a number of different perspectives so that you can make the decision that is most appropriate for your museum. So you'll see a lot of different options coming out of this all the way throughout the process.
What changes are you seeing in COVID with museums? Barbara wants to know.
Barbara, a number at the beginning. We were helping museums buy different kinds of devices so that you could run their touch screens and you wouldn't have to touch any of the surfaces. But what's happened is now that we're reflectively a number of months or years out of this, we've determined all the materials and finishes that don't transfer germs and bacteria and won't transfer COVID. So we originally weren't sure about the surface transmission. And all the new touch technology, you don't have to touch the screen. You get within a few inches and it activates the screen. So there are very few surfaces that you have to touch. We do see more thinking about personal space. So there is a lot of assessment being done about opening up museums and a lot of work done. Fortunately, museums, because of their collections, have very robust cooling and heating systems and humidification systems and air filtration systems. So you're probably in one of the safest places you're ever going to be in a museum when it comes to the air filtration systems.
So you mentioned about the museums that are beginning to reopen now, sort of post-COVID. Levi wonders about the 33% of museums that will not reopen. What about them?
It's a long discussion, Levi. I think that reflectively, I would say that one of the divisions in our group that was busier than any was our Gallagher Museum Surfaces division, because they do all the financial feasibility work and operational planning. Many institutions were very poorly managed and had no financial backstop whatsoever. And as we look at a new institution, it'll absolutely focus on what's the endowment funding going to look like, so that you know that you have some form of backstop should anything like this ever happen. A lot of museums were caught with, in some cases, not even a month's backlog of income to be able to cover staff. So there's certainly going to be museums that don't reopen. The question in that regard is probably always, should they have been open in the first place? Going back out to a community on an annual basis to raise money is a big challenge. And some operating dollars, not that difficult, but to really have to go out for major tranches of funds every year is really difficult, and people do get weary of it.
So Jeannie writes that she's going to Israel in the fall and she has a full day planned for the museum in Tel Aviv. She'd like your recommendations for what particularly in the museum you would recommend. And then the second part of her question is, can you talk about technology and exhibits? Her grandson wants to know if you use augmented reality.
Well, first of all, you need to see the whole thing. It would be like picking my favorite child. It's a great experience. You'll find some, depending on your interest in the group you're with, some parts of the museum will clearly be a lot more unique for visitors. It's a very open circulation, so we're encouraging visitors to move to areas that they are interested in first, so that there's not a rigid chronology to the museum. It's much more of a thematic structure. The technological perspective on museums today is all over the boards. It becomes, again, a personal perspective of the museum itself. As you know, Israel is a fairly large technology industry and burgeoning technology industry, and they were really interested in pushing hard on that industry to support them, and they did. So the museum also never really had collection. So throughout the design process, they were collecting. And so while there's a number of artifacts in the museum now, and there's as much technology to help take that story deeper. And that's really what technology is an opportunity for in any museum, is explore something deeper, explore different perspectives, ask your visitor questions of engagement so that you're beginning to learn more about them as they go through the museum. I would tell you that in most museums today, while you're engaging in an interactive, at the end of the day, the museum is downloading all the statistical information off of that interactive and learning what you were interested in, how much time you spent there, what kind of questions you asked, and it helps them adapt to public programming and to traveling exhibitions because they're seeing what a visitor's interest levels are.
So speaking about interests, Mike wonders what kinds of permanent exhibits best attract repeat visitors?
Mike, I wish I had a magic answer for that. I think that what probably attracts repeat visitors more, and I'm not dodging the question, but usually repeat visitation in regional museums is when people have visiting friends and relatives, to be honest with you, if you're going to the core exhibition. Or some families use it and when the weather's bad to go back and just re-engage. It's really your public programming that's so important. And what you did over the last year was incredible. And the more of that that takes place, both virtually and on site, that's how you reach back into the local community. So oftentimes visitors think, well, it's only about the exhibits. And I think public programming is as important as the core exhibition itself.
Marty wonders about what kind of staffing do you think a modern history museum needs, and how should we imagine costs for such staffing?
Marty, it'll all be based on size. I think that the size of an institution pushes to some degree the need for operations, but all museums should have a core staff that includes education, programming, and outreach. And I can almost promise you, you'll have an IT person. There'll be enough media. And media is also a way to keep subject matter fresh. So if you want to up your game every few months and change something in your media platform, you can do that. So you'll probably have an IT staff. As part of our work with the museum, we will be creating a staffing plan as well. So there'll be an operations plan and a staffing plan.
Nina is curious about the relationship with the Holocaust Museum, and I'm not sure if she's thinking there of our local Holocaust Memorial Center or the National Museum or another one, but I think she's curious about what work you specifically did for the Holocaust Museum.
All we've done with them is bring the Eichmann exhibit to their museum. So they're a very well-respected institution. I was not involved in the design of the museum. I really enjoy their staff. I think that they have a great staff and dedicated staff there. Obviously, whatever happens in your museum, you'll want to have some synergistic or reciprocal programming so that you can support each other in that regards. Museums 15 years ago used to never share programming, or they were afraid that you were going to take their audiences from them, and more that's really dissipated. And cultural institutions within any community tend to want to do more together than apart.
So we have some museum creation questions now. Mickey says, great presentation. At what point in your work will you be able to determine feasibility? And how often in your work have you determined that something is not feasible?
I'll answer the second one first. We have made many recommendations for museums not to be built. When people hire us and ask us to come in and look at their museum, if it just doesn't make financial sense, or it will be too big a burden on the community, then we'll make a recommendation. That doesn't mean they have to follow our recommendation, but we will make a recommendation not to build it. That happens at about 1 out of 5, believe it or not, people that are studying whether or not they should do a museum. Either there isn't a big enough audience, there isn't financial support within the community, it's too focused or too unique a subject matter that there isn't the potential to raise money for it. And so I think that the financial aspect of what you're going to see in your museum while we're planning the framework for the guest experience or the core museum experience, that financial feasibility study will be done right at the same time, so you can see what the impact of size is. As an example, the New Orleans Museum originally thought that they wanted to have 12,000 square feet of exhibition space, and it was our recommendation to only do 7. And that was all driven by what we felt the potential for fundraising was for them in the New Orleans community. And they put a capital campaign out for 14 million, and to date they've raised 13.5. So they've done quite well on all commitments. Only one commitment over $1 million, and the rest were all commitments under $1 million.
Anna Ruth asks, is there a typical timeline in the creation of a museum without defining how much time for each segment?
I'll answer that 2 ways. Once the money's in place, it's about a 3-year cycle. So but with many institutions like potentially yours, you're going to go through a visioning and feasibility phase. Then you're going to need to go put that away for a while and go out on a capital campaign so that you can fund the process. Usually when a museum gets to about 60% of their capital campaign goals, they will release the design process and begin the design process, because design often generates new information and new materials for potential new donors so that you can close your capital campaign.
We've got a 2-part question from Harriet. She says, thank you for an informative and interesting presentation. Can you speak a little more on the possibility and ways you analyze the potential and possibilities of a smaller, more limited approach and a larger, more expansive approach in different communities?
I think that that's what we will, with the team at your museum, explore initially. We can do a plan A, a plan B, and a plan C. And that's usually all about size. Once you've framed your content will fill the void of size. If you go from 7,000 to 12,000 to 15,000, it just gives us more opportunity to expand the depth of the particular content. And if the team decides that they would like to look at a variety of different development scales, then we can do that. That's exactly what New Orleans did, by the way. And they chose the middle ground. They didn't choose the smallest version, and they didn't choose the largest version.
The second part to Harriet's question is, how will/do you help a community think about the right size for them today and tomorrow?
It's my favorite words, right size. That is an important part of the work that we're going to be doing, is what we refer to in our industry as right sizing. The experience and the program with your financial modeling, and along with that feasibility study, there will be a year 1 operational plan, a year 5 operational plan, and a year 10 operational plan. Because museums go through cycles. In the attendance cycles spike in the beginning, then they flatten out, then they rise again. So we'll be doing an operation plan with the team.
So that concludes the Q&A that has come in. Patrick, thank you so much for this presentation. It's been absolutely fantastic. Risha, I will turn it back over to you.
Okay, Patrick, that was wonderful. And I'd like to say to those who are on the call, as you can see, the Jewish Historical Society has been busy during this pandemic. We've been visible in the community. We've established new collaborations, new partnerships, and we are excited about the future of our organization. And you will be hearing more about that in the future. So at this point, it is 7:56. And is there a motion to adjourn this meeting? Jeannie Weiner moves to adjourn the meeting and Barbara Cohn seconds it. So meeting adjourned. Have a wonderful evening and we will see you in the fall.